evidence is overwhelming that aliens created humanity. The first clue is the fact that we look nothing like any other animal on Earth. In fact, we look more like aliens than we do animals. This is because we were created in their image. The second clue is that we have technology that is far beyond anything that could have been created by humans. How did we go so rapidly from being primitive cavemen to creating computers, satellites, and space shuttles? The only explanation is that aliens gave us this technology. The third clue is that many of our religions teach us that aliens created us. This is not a coincidence. Religion is a way for aliens to control us. They created us, so they know what will make us happy and what will make us obey them. There are many theories about the origins of religion, but one that is often overlooked is the possibility that aliens created religion. There are a number of reasons to believe that aliens might be responsible for religious beliefs and practices. One reason is that many religious texts include descriptions of beings that sound like aliens. For example, the Bible describes angels as beings with wings who fly and carry messages from God. This description sounds a lot like what we would expect aliens to look like. Another reason is that many religious practices, such as prayer and meditation, seem to be designed to contact aliens. These practices are often done in private, which would make sense if they were meant to contact beings from another world. Finally, there are a number of reports of people who have had contact with aliens and claim that they were given religious messages. These people have no reason to lie, and their stories are often very convincing. In fact, there are many theories about the existence of aliens and whether or not they have visited our planet. Some people believe that aliens have been visiting us for centuries, and that they have even played a role in human history. One theory is that Jesus Christ was actually an alien. There are a few pieces of evidence that suggest that Jesus may have been an alien. First of all, there are many accounts of Jesus performing miracles, such as healing the sick and walking on water. These miracles would be impossible for a human to perform, but they could easily be explained if Jesus was an alien with supernatural powers. Another piece of evidence is the fact that Jesus' body was never found after his crucifixion. Some people believe that aliens took Jesus' body away after he died, which would explain why it was never found. Lastly, many people believe that Jesus' appearance was not human-like. For example, some people say that Jesus had long hair and a beard, which was not typical of Jewish men at the time. Also, there are accounts of Jesus' skin glowing and his eyes being very bright. These characteristics could be explained if Jesus was not human. And what about other religious originators, such as Buddha? First of all, Buddha was born into a wealthy family. His father was a king, and his mother was a princess. He had everything a person could want. But instead of living a life of luxury, Buddha chose to live a life of poverty. He gave up all his material possessions and became a monk. Why would he do this? It doesn't make any human sense. But it does if you think about it from an alien perspective. Think about it. If you were an alien and you landed on our planet, the first thing you would want to do is learn about our cultures and customs. And what better way to do that than to live among us? That's exactly what Buddha did. He lived among us, learned about our ways, and taught us about his own. He was also known for his miraculous powers. He could levitate, cure the sick, and even walk on water, like Jesus. How could a human being do these things? The only explanation is that he wasn't human. He was an alien. So the next time you see a statue of Buddha, remember that he was an alien, and he came to our planet to help us learn about our own humanity. There is also the theory which suggests that Krishna, an important figure in Hinduism, was actually an alien. There are several pieces of evidence that support this theory. First, Krishna is often depicted with blue skin, which could be an indication that he was not from Earth. Second, he possesses supernatural powers that are beyond the abilities of humans. He can defeat enemies with his mind, fly through the air, and change his appearance at will. Krishna is said to have come from another planet called Dvarka. This is significant because it's believed that aliens often come from other planets or dimensions. Fourth, Krishna is described as being, quote, not of this world. This could mean that he was an alien who didn't belong on Earth. Fifth, Krishna is said to have had a close relationship with cows. Cows are considered sacred in Hinduism, and they're also seen as a symbol of alien life. It's believed that aliens often take on the form of animals to interact with humans. There are many other theories about Krishna's true identity, but the evidence suggests that he was an alien. In fact, as far back as we care to go, the gods were aliens. The ancient Egyptians worshipped a pantheon of gods and goddesses who they believed were responsible for the natural world and human affairs. Some of these deities were said to have come from the sky, and it's not hard to see why people might think that the Egyptian gods were aliens. For one thing, the gods were often depicted as having animal heads, which would certainly be bizarre to us. They were also sometimes shown with wings, which could be interpreted as meaning that they could fly. And in many ancient cultures, aliens were thought to be responsible for things like crop circles and other unexplained phenomena. In fact, the Egyptian gods were aliens who came to Earth in order to help the ancient Egyptians in their time of need. They were able to help the Egyptians with their advanced technology and knowledge of the universe. The Egyptians worshipped the gods and built temples in their honor. The gods are also believed to be responsible for giving the Egyptians their writing and hieroglyphics. But what about the moon and its relationship to aliens and religion? The fact that lunar gods were aliens is a theory that has been around for centuries. The theory goes that the moon is actually a spacecraft that is piloted by beings from another planet. These beings are said to be responsible for the phases of the moon, as well as the tides and other phenomena on Earth. It has been speculated that the moon may be a hollowed-out planet or a captured asteroid. It would relate that if the moon was a base for aliens, then the gods we associate with the moon would also be aliens. One of the earliest was the Egyptian god Thoth. There is a great deal of evidence to suggest that the Egyptian god Thoth was an alien. First and foremost, Thoth is often depicted as having an elongated head, which is a common characteristic of aliens in popular culture and from numerous eyewitness accounts. Additionally, Thoth is said to have knowledge of all things, which is another common trait of aliens. Finally, Thoth is often associated with the moon, and aliens are of course associated with space. Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt, was also most likely an alien. The main evidence for this claim comes from the fact that she was able to change her shape at will, something that is not possible for humans. Diana was also said to be able to fly, another ability that is not possible for humans and common to ancient aliens. Other evidence that Diana was an alien includes the fact that she was often seen in the company of animals, which were said to be her loyal servants. This is also a common trait amongst modern alien sightings. Diana was also said to be able to communicate with plants and trees. This is another ability that is not possible for humans. Hecate was an ancient Greek moon goddess associated with magic, witchcraft, ghosts, and crossroads. She was known as a powerful sorceress and was sometimes depicted as having 3 heads or 3 bodies. There is evidence to suggest that Hecate was an alien goddess. One theory is that she was a member of the Pleiades, a group of 7 stars in the constellation Taurus. The Pleiades were often associated with witchcraft and magic, all traits no human has. Hecate's connection to the moon, ghosts, and crossroads also support the idea that she was an otherworldly being. Crossroads were thought to be places where the veil between this world and the next was thin, and Hecate was often invoked at these locations. There are many ancient Greek goddesses, but Phoebe is one of the most intriguing. She was said to be a beautiful woman with long flowing hair. She was also said to have the ability to see the future. But there are some who believe that Phoebe was not a goddess at all, but an alien. The first piece of evidence that Phoebe was an alien is her name. Phoebe is not a Greek name. In fact, it's not even a human name. It's the name of a moon of Saturn. So why would an ancient Greek goddess have the name of a moon? It's possible that Phoebe was named after the moon because she came from there. The second piece of evidence is her ability to see the future. This is a power that is not typically associated with Greek goddesses, but it is a power that is often associated with aliens. So it's possible that Phoebe's ability to see the future was actually a result of her being an alien. The third piece of evidence is her association with the stars. Greek goddesses are typically associated with the sun and the moon, but Phoebe was said to be associated with the stars. This is another indicator that she may have been an alien and come from the stars. Of course, there is a popular concept of the one God we have today. In order to prove that God was an alien, we would need to have a clear definition of what God is. For the sake of this argument, let's say that God is an all-powerful, all-knowing being who created the universe. There are a few pieces of evidence that could be used to support the claim that God was an alien. First, if God is all-powerful and all-knowing, it's unlikely that he's human. Second, the Bible contains numerous references to God coming down from the sky or appearing in a burning bush. These could be interpreted as God literally coming from another world. In fact, our modern concept of God comes from the Hebrew Yahweh. Yahweh was most likely an alien, and there are many proofs to support this claim. First and foremost, the Bible tells us that Yahweh was not born on earth, but was instead brought down from heaven. This is significant because it means that Yahweh was not subject to the laws of nature that govern earthly beings. Yahweh was also not bound by the limitations of the human body and was able to perform miracles that would be impossible for a human. Another proof that Yahweh was an alien is the fact that he is described as being like a man. This is significant because it means that Yahweh was not a human being, but was something else entirely. Finally, the fact that Yahweh is described as being invisible is another strong piece of evidence that he was not human. This is because humans are not invisible, and the only way that Yahweh could be described as such is if he was not of this world, and indeed had powers to evade our sight. In essence, the gods and goddesses of the past all have the powers of what we today call aliens. They watch us from the moon, and they were the originators of religion. Even ancient man believed this to be the case. There is compelling evidence that ancient man believed aliens lived on the moon or came down from the skies. This belief is reflected in ancient art, mythology, and even religious texts. The first evidence comes from ancient art. Depictions of flying saucers and other strange objects in the sky are found in cave paintings all over the world. This suggests that ancient man was aware of something strange in the sky, and that they believed these objects were operated by aliens. Mythology is another source of evidence. Many ancient cultures have stories of gods or other beings coming down from the sky in strange vessels. This suggests that ancient man believed that aliens were visiting them from other worlds. Finally, there are religious texts that mention aliens. The Bible, for example, describes angels as beings who come down from heaven in flaming chariots. This is clearly a reference to aliens, and it shows that ancient man believed that aliens were real. In conclusion, there is strong evidence that ancient man believed in aliens. Thousands of years ago, a special advanced race of beings came to Earth. They were seen as gods by primitive man and worshipped. They set themselves apart, and yet some mated with humans and created a special race. When the elders departed, this hybrid species remained and taught mankind. Civilization emerged. Writing, art, science, engineering, architecture, and more spread around the globe. The human race, that had been happy for tens of thousands of years to hunt and gather, now built massive pyramids, cultivated the land, forged steel, and eventually held tiny computers in their hands that enabled them to communicate around the world instantly and discover knowledge with the swipe of a finger. All of this and more is only part of the story, for our benefactors had an ulterior motive. They took control of our minds, our hearts. They control this world. They control all of us. From the moment you are born, you are numbered and moved through a process to feed their machine. Nobody is truly free. We are all working for the masters. Every now and then, they are revealed to the world, and in the 18th century, we had a glimpse of their massive power. We know them as the Illuminati, and they originated in ancient times. Quote, "Throughout Mesopotamia, from the earliest times of Sumer and Akkad, all lands were owned by gods and men were their slaves. Of this, the cuneiform texts leave no doubt whatsoever. Each city-state had its principal god, and the king was described in the very earliest written documents that we have as, quote, the tenant farmer of the god. All the great religions originate in the same historical tales of great lights that descended to earth, taught the humans, brought them out of the Dark Ages, bred them and established rulers and priests. Using propaganda, mind control, and even force, humans were treated like sheep and told to believe and behave. We had to worship the lights in the sky. We had to bow to their representatives on earth, and we had to pay the priest for the privilege of doing so. Land was taken from us, and we were told to pay to live upon it. To pay, we had to work every waking moment. Then, we had to pay taxes to the relatives of the rulers and priests in government who made laws to keep us controlled. We were thrown into war against our brothers, told to build pyramids and great walls, experimented on, and abused every step of the way. If any of this is sounding familiar, it is simply because absolutely nothing has really changed, even though the powers that be would have us believe so. From the 17th century onwards, we believed we had found a way of revolting against this oppression. Across Europe and the US, so-called freemen fought against the tyranny. And yet the fact is this: the rulers had people in both camps. The US War of Independence, for instance, was led by men on both sides who were members of the same Freemasonic lodges, who were often themselves descendants of royal stock. The English Civil War ended up with the English begging for a royal to come back on the throne. It was all staged. It has always been staged. The First and Second World Wars changed the political map of Europe, and yet the royals and religions remain. Power cleverly shifts around, but always, at the very top, the same families run the world. Modern control began in the 18th century as a reaction to the growing enlightenment of the human population. The printed word had an unfortunate side effect for those in power. People started to gain knowledge and spread dissent. One very clever method of controlling such dissent is to cause it, own it, and control it. Create your very own group that seemingly goes against the status quo. And not only do you manipulate those who are naturally drawn towards it, you gather your own secondary power base to play around with. One sure way of winning any game is to own both sides. In the 18th century, the modern era of mind control began with the creation of the Illuminati. The name in itself must remind us of the very fact that those who originally came to Earth were the illuminated ones. In the 18th century, a Freemason wrote the following words: "There are a certain number of people who have arrived at the highest degree of imposture. They have conceived the project of reigning over opinions and of conquering not kingdoms nor provinces, but the human mind. This project is gigantic and has something of madness in it, which causes neither alarm nor uneasiness. But when we descend to details, when we regard what passes before our eyes of the hidden principles, when we perceive a sudden revolution in favor of ignorance and incapacity, we must look for the cause of it. And if we find that a revealed and known system explains all the phenomena which succeeded each other with terrifying rapidity, how can we not believe it?" Standard history tells us that they were started by Jean Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Order of the Illuminati. Weishaupt was born in Bavaria on the 6th of February, 1748. His father, Baron Ickstadt, was a professor at the University of Ingolstadt, having married the niece of the curator. The Baron secured a scholarship at the Jesuit College for Adam, who then went on to become a law student at the age of 15. Ingolstadt was a steadfastly Jesuit area and had been for over 200 years. Dissent was not permitted, even though they had been partially suppressed in 1773 by Clement XIV. It has been said of the Jesuits that they were the world's largest and most powerful secret service, due mainly to the fact that they were feared by many in the Catholic Church, and that a universal confession could be well utilized for blackmail. According to a converted nun, the Jesuits offer the world at large a system of theology by which every law, divine or human, may be broken with impunity, and by which the very bulls of popes may be defied. It is a ghastly religion. It is a religion to be abhorred by all honest and honorable men. So according to this 19th century writer, they were even above the bulls of the Pope. Edwin A. Sherman, an American Freemason also writing in the 19th century, stated, "The Jesuits laugh at us, and during their hilarity, the rattlesnake is coiled at our feet, climbing to strike us in the heart." Even President Lincoln, who was finally assassinated after prior attempts, said, "The Jesuits are so expert in those deeds of blood that Henry IV said that it was impossible to escape them, and he became their victim, though he did all he could to protect himself. I know that the Jesuits never forget nor forsake." It seems like a peculiar world that the Jesuits inhabit. On the one hand, they fraternize with Freemasons, royalty, and presidents, and on the other, taking an oath which puts them at odds with just about everybody who is not Catholic. It is into this world that Weishaupt was brought up. By 1775, Weishaupt was professor of canon law at Ingolstadt, and it was this year he or somebody else chose for Weishaupt to form a plan of an association of which he would head. This association would, quote, "oppose the forces of superstition and lies," or in other words, religion. The thoughts of many commentators is that Weishaupt so hated the Jesuits that he thoroughly intended to do away with them once and for all. The truth is that Weishaupt was in fact trained by the Jesuits for the purpose of raising a worldwide army of spies who would constantly be feeding back information from their own enemies. The information that the Jesuits could not get anymore through their confessions. In fact, the Illuminati even set up their own confessions in line with that of the Jesuits. All of this surveillance and confession was fed back to the Jesuits from the very people who were supposed to be against them. How better to find out what was in the mind of the opposition than to be the opposition? This is a standard double ploy utilized for centuries by the secret services of all religions and states. They even fed the anti-Semitic rhetoric, which suited the Catholic Church down to the ground. Through associations with the Freemasons, the Jesuits managed to get information from and influence to the Freemasons of the globe. These business leaders, politicians, military commanders, religionists, and so-called free thinkers were in fact being manipulated yet again, and very often with the exact same devices that had been used for thousands of years. Belief in a divine entity, worship of a being of light, otherwise known as Lucifer, and even the concept that their own secret line stretched back to the time of Egypt and beyond. What many probably didn't realize was this: all of that was true. They were being controlled and manipulated by a sacred line that did originate thousands of years ago, and they still are.
We humans are obsessed with the idea that we're not alone, that somewhere out there in the universe there are other life forms intelligent enough to communicate with us. Or maybe even destroy us. But if there is life out there, why haven't we heard from them yet? Or have we? In 1961, the astronomer Frank Drake devised a calculation that predicted the existence of millions of civilizations out there among the stars. His Drake equation used some fairly speculative assumptions, but it ignited our curiosity. Are we just one small part of a vast cosmic zoo? For physicist Enrico Fermi, the contradiction between this prediction and reality made no sense, and it came to be known as the Fermi paradox. Where is everybody? He wanted to know. There could be an infinite number of answers to this question. There is no paradox, and we really are alone in the universe. Depressing though it may be, sometimes the simplest answers are the most plausible. Or they're ghosting us. Maybe aliens have a policy not to interfere with less advanced cultures, similar to the Prime Directive on Star Trek. They don't live long enough to get in touch with us. Now, this idea, known as the Great Filter, says that no advanced civilization survives long enough to still be around when its neighbors are thriving. For us, threats like nuclear war, climate change, or pandemics might spell our doom. Or they really are here. From Roswell to the Lubbock Lights, there have been plenty of UFO sightings on Earth. Is the government hiding the existence and evidence of this? Or is it fake news? The silence from another civilization is not for want of looking on our part. In 1960, Drake pointed a radio telescope towards two nearby stars and waited for that hotline bling. Instead of intelligent messages, he got a load of static and interference from a secret military experiment. Nevertheless, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, was born. Then on the 15th of August of 1977, another SETI program recorded a brief radio signal coming from the direction of Sagittarius. Jerry Eman, the astronomer analyzing the data at the Big Ear telescope that day, was so excited that he wrote "wow" in the margin of the printout. So far, that "wow" signal stands as our most hopeful sign of alien communication. But listening for ET to phone home is a bit like standing by the payphone waiting for the phone to ring. Maybe we have to make the first move. Drake tried this too, sending a radio message towards globular star cluster M13. Known as the Arecibo message, it showed potential aliens our DNA structure, solar system, and some of the biochemicals of earthly life. We also tried sending aliens a greeting on board space probes Pioneer 10 and 11, which included images of humans and directions to our planet. Then, in 1977, we sent a more ambitious message, full of audio and images, on board the Voyager probes. We even included a mixtape of some of our favorite tunes, including Bach, Beethoven, Louis Armstrong, and Chuck Berry, to impress any friendly life forms, or at least the ones with ears. And if that didn't entice them to get in touch, maybe this illustration of humans eating, licking, and drinking might? By now, aliens might know a lot about us, including what we need to survive and how to reach us. And you might be wondering whether it's such a good idea to be broadcasting our location all over the galaxy when we don't know who's listening. It's like shouting in a forest before you know if there are tigers, lions, and bears, said a SETI researcher. Those bears might have planet-destroying interstellar missiles. Putting aside the question of whether we should try to contact aliens, are we even doing it right? These alien societies might be millions of years old, so to them, our radio messages might look as outdated as flip phones or pagers, and even radio. There are plenty of other ways to look for life. We can look for biosignatures. Over time, the biochemistry of billions of creatures can transform a world in distinctive ways. By analyzing the wavelengths of light that come through the planet's atmosphere, we can look for gases that suggest the presence of life. Or we can look for technosignatures. If we do see signs of life on another planet, that won't tell us whether it is inhabited by mindless green slime or sentient city builders. A more reliable approach to look for kindred spirits is to look for chemicals that only intelligent civilizations can produce. For example, city lights. Aliens with night vision as limited as ours might festoon their built environment with artificial lighting, so maybe we could spot cities lit up on the planet's dark side. Aliens may be on the go. Alien spaceships might be easier to spot than their home planets. Maybe we can look for high-powered lasers used to push optical sails, or intense plumes of light generated by an antimatter engine, like those imagined in Star Trek. Or aliens might have built gargantuan engineering projects like a Dyson sphere, named after the physicist and engineer Freeman Dyson, which are swarms of devices around a star that harvest its energy. The Ozymandias effect is another way. The ruins of advanced civilizations doomed by their own technology might have their own telltale signatures. If we find dead civilizations before we find living ones, that might not bode well for our future. If we do make contact with aliens, It would be a decisive blow to the idea that humans are the center of the universe. But how much cooler would it be to discover that we're just one branch of a vast galactic tree of life?
In December 1965, Gemini 7 astronauts James Lovell and Frank Borman saw a UFO during their second orbit of their record-breaking 14-day flight. Borman reported that he saw an unidentified spacecraft some distance from their capsule. Gemini Control at Cape Kennedy told him he was seeing the final stage of their own Titan booster rocket.
Bogey at 10 o'clock high.
This is Houston. Say again, 7.
Said we have a bogey at 10 o'clock high.
Roger.
At this point, the live broadcast of the conversation is interrupted by Capcom.
Gemini 7, is that the booster or is that an actual sighting?
We have several actual sighting.
Estimated distance or size?
We also have the booster in sight.
Borman confirmed that he could see the booster rocket all right, but that he could also see something completely different. He is reported to have taken some magnificent photos of 2 mushroom-shaped UFOs on December 4th. The pictures seem to show the glow of a propulsion system on the underside. The pictures were taken at a range of several hundred yards. In 2003, China's first astronaut, Yang Liwei, gets a haunting experience as he hears a knocking on the outside of his spaceship's door. There are no faults with his craft. So is he imagining it, or is there someone or something on the outside knocking to get in? Cosmonauts Leonid Kazim, Vladimir Solyov, and cardiologist Olaf Atkov were on their 155th day aboard the Salyut 7, conducting medical experiments, when the trio noticed what they described as a brilliant orange cloud surrounding the station. The Salyut 7 had been plagued by a steady stream of system failures, and the men aboard the craft were understandably concerned that the glow might represent a life-threatening fire. Fearing the worst, the cosmonauts rushed to the portholes, only to find themselves blinded by an intense luminescence that poured in through the circular apertures. After their vision adjusted to the light, the cosmonauts radioed ground control, telling them that the station was bathed in an anomalous, self-illuminated mist. The men returned to the portholes, shielding their eyes from the radiance, and that's when they spied something so incredible that it would alter their perception of reality. According to reports published in newspapers across the globe, the 3 Russian explorers saw colossal, winged, humanoid creatures hovering just outside the station in the vacuum of space. They were said to resemble those of humans with peaceful expressions, and the Soviet scientists claimed that the creatures noticed them and offered distinctly beatific smiles. This quote was published in the newspaper reports. Quote, "What we saw were 7 giant figures in the form of humans, but with wings and mist-like halos, as in the classic depiction of angels." The cosmonauts described these haloed beings as nearly 80 feet in height, with a wingspan comparable to that of a 747. The men observed the seraphim for 10 minutes before they vanished, leaving the isolated comrades to ponder what it was that they had seen, trying to gather the courage to report it to their superiors. By their own admission, the cosmonauts were themselves reluctant to accept the existence of the angelic beings which they had seen, and concluded that they were more likely suffering from some form of mass delusion brought on by their long space journey, rather than an actual encounter with alien entities. Their self-induced denial was put to the test 11 days later, when additional cosmonauts arrived at the station and the celestial beings returned. Which brings us to the next mystery. According to reports, just days after the new Soviet cosmonauts were aboard the Salyut 7, the orange glow again enveloped the station. This time, all 6 of the space travelers were said to have witnessed the gigantic winged beings keeping pace with the station, which they once again dutifully reported to the alarmed ground control team below. As the 6 cosmonauts stared out of the portholes, they must have been overwhelmed by sensations of awe, wonder, and fear. They were all skilled pilots, scientists, and doctors, who after years of knowing where they stood on the evolutionary scale, were confronted with humanoid creatures soaring in the dark vacuum of space. Creatures that seemed not merely alien, but supernatural. According to news accounts, one of the cosmonauts stated, quote, "They were glowing, and we were truly overwhelmed. There was a great orange light, and through it, we could see the figures of 7 angels. They were smiling as though they shared a glorious secret, but within a few minutes they were gone, and we never saw them again." In the 1980s and 90s, several reports emerged of strange lights being seen over Plum Island, and there were reports of odd-looking creatures being washed up on the neighboring beaches. These were categorized as possible ET-related debris, although they were also attributed directly to what was going on in the facilities on the island. When looking at reports of this kind, one has to remember that there is the possibility that some of these mutations could accidentally be introduced into the area of these installations, which leads to the possibility that some of these mutations might spontaneously mutate even further and travel to areas far removed from their point of origin. This would, of course, greatly depend on what traits these creatures had been designed to exhibit, as well as their speed, mobility, and ability to use their surroundings to hide out and even curb their aggression, which would probably be a parameter factored into the project. Another aspect of this is the similarities between what occurs at these facilities and what reportedly occurred at other locations not normally associated with bioweapons. To explore this dimension of the Dark Ops enigma, we must enter into the world of ufology and consider what may or may not have happened at Dulce Base in New Mexico. Dulce Base. This underground location, supposedly, with the full knowledge and active cooperation of the U.S. government, played host to a range of alien species with the apparent aim of exchanging information on weapons and other advanced technologies. One of the most horrifying claims made for this installation was the presence of the so-called blood lab, where various kinds of blood, both natural and synthetic, was processed ostensibly for the consumption of the extraterrestrials who required it for their existence. Terrifying stuff, so much so that it borders on the literally unbelievable. But perhaps we should look beyond the obvious. Might this have been part of the lengthy and well-funded disinformation campaign that involved the subject of ufology in its wider sense? It wouldn't be the first time this has occurred. It is known and acknowledged that the U.S. Air Force of Special Investigations, now just known as OSI, as well as the CIA and the NSA, actively used various black propaganda and other disinformation techniques to shield what exactly went on at a range of military facilities. Therefore, it is not beyond possibility that the same has occurred at the Dulce base as well, to conceal work of a highly secret and sinister nature, involving, once again, bioweapons. But more tellingly, very early work on human embryo and stem cell research. Here again, reports of UFO sightings and encounters with strange creatures abound in this area, and it was reports such as these, particularly of UFOs, that directly led to the mental breakdown of Dr. Paul Benowitz, whose concerns and patriotism brought him to the baleful attention of the OSI and the other two previously mentioned organizations, whose disinformation efforts were equally successful. Because what was reported by Benowitz and others was soon exaggerated, speculated upon, and eventually confabulated into the realms of science fiction. While the various agencies involved, with a well-funded interest in these matters, continued undeterred, their very real agendas safe behind the smokescreen of lies, misinformation, and disinformation. This truly makes one think, was there really a blood lab? Quite possibly. Was it involved in the manufacture of various biologically based products? Again, this cannot be ruled out. Were the sightings of strange creatures in the areas mentioned so far sightings of ETs? Or were they the end results of some truly unthinkably experiments on human and animal mutations? The only possible defense that governments who insist on conducting this kind of experimentation have is that the experiments are so horrific that normal human beings literally have no adequate frame of reference other than to assume they must be extraterrestrial. In their clandestine world, this is called hiding in plain sight. It is likely that the sightings made in the early 20th century were badly mutated animals in the very early days of gene manipulation, and that a few such creatures possibly created in these laboratories managed to escape, either through carelessness or even through the active collusion of people working on these black projects. Given that they were mutants, it's likely that they had no effective immune system and died relatively quickly once outside the labs that were their sanitized environment. Either that, or they were rounded up and returned, or killed. Given the descriptions and locations of most of the sightings, these were probably experimental biological entities. Unit 731. Would governments do this? Again, unfortunately, the answer is yes, they would. Because there is abundant historical evidence to prove it in light of the MK-Ultra program and the reported 100-plus programs of similar diabolical intent in the name of national security. We have already considered what was done in the name of science in the Nazi concentration camps. But if it is possible, these almost pale into insignificance when compared with the sadistic outrages conducted under the direct supervision of Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii of the Imperial Japanese Army at the notorious Unit 731, situated at the Pingfeng district of Harbin, which is the largest city in what is now northeast China. The victims here were mainly Chinese, with some Soviet and American prisoners thrown in. The experiments involved vivisection, crude limb transplants, germ warfare, the effects on the body of various conventional weapons, starvation, dehydration, extremes of temperature, and being confined in high and low pressure chambers and centrifuges until dead. Nothing was too inhuman, but then again, these prisoners were not even regarded as human beings. Again, many of the scientists involved in these experiments were taken by the US military for its own ends, in a rerun of the aforementioned Project Paperclip, and also for the pragmatic reason that it prevented the Russians getting access to their knowledge and data. One of the men who helped run and supervise what went on there was Ryoichi Naito, a lieutenant colonel and surgeon, who astonishingly went on to found one of Japan's leading pharmaceutical companies, Green Cross. It took the Japanese authorities more than 50 years to admit the horrific truth about just what occurred at this literal hell-on-earth facility, and sadly, experimentation on human beings still continues to this day in isolated countries with extreme dictatorships. The chimeras. There is no doubt that human-animal experiments are still attempted in various laboratories located around the world and have resulted in the deliberate production of utterly abominable results, such as ape-human embryos and other ungodly biological combinations that some call chimeras. Some of the laboratories act as proxies because the nature of the work is so horrific that, for example, the USA or UK would not allow it to occur within its own territory. So it farms out and pays for the experimentation, often in third world countries, where the laws are much more lax and where money and favor are motivating factors. The chimera is more common than it first appears, as one can be created naturally enough through a quirk of nature, as well as via the deliberate manipulation of cells, and it is the second of these possibilities that causes the real concern. In 2003, in China, at the Shanghai Second Medical University, researchers allegedly combined human skin cells with those of dead rabbit eggs to create, presumably, the first human embryos that were chimeras. The embryos from this experiment were allowed to develop for a few days in the laboratory, then were supposedly destroyed to harvest the resulting stem cells. All of this began at the Rosalind Institute in Scotland. In 1996, where the world's first known viable clone was created, which was Dolly the sheep, whose blood was composed of 15% human cells and 85% sheep cells. Another series of experiments authorized in the UK was conducted under the terms of the 2008 Human Fertilization and Embryology Act. The outcome of these experiments were two distinct types of hybrid. One is called a chimera, and the other a hybrid. Chimeras in this instance are human cells mixed with animal embryos, whereas hybrids are created from a human nucleus being implanted into an animal cell. The experiments eventually ceased due to a lack of funding, but their outcome was the development of over 100 definite mutations and hybrids. These were presumably destroyed after the experiment ceased, but with reports such as these, one can never be sure, especially if these hybrids and mutants were viable and there was sufficient interest from non-academic agencies, perhaps military who had the facilities, time, necessary expertise, and of course the ability to fund further development. Scientists have claimed that the stem cells extracted from the mutations and hybrids could ultimately be used to treat a number of incurable diseases. But of course, this might not be the priority, especially when there is a great deal of money to be made, or a significant advantage can be gained. The implications for this kind of research are immense, both for drug companies and their shareholders, as well as the powerful elite in the less scrupulous world of defense. Remember once again that this is the work that has so far emerged into the public domain, but there are many more classified experiments that have never, and most likely will never be known, or divulged by those controlling these and other dark projects.